Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Steinberg Kuntz, licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of Bright and Quirky. I am so thrilled today to have with me Dr. Mona Delahooke and Dr. Stephen Porges. Dr. Delahooke is a clinical psychologist and author of Beyond Behaviors, using brain science and compassion to understand and solve children's behavioral challenges. We've also got with us Dr. Stephen Porges. He's the originator of the polyvagal theory. He's an esteemed professor and holder of several patents. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. We all work with kids and teachers, and we hear all kinds of stories. And first of all, my heart goes out to teachers, especially during these trying times. Not only are they doing things very differently with COVID, but also even when there isn't COVID, there isn't enough time to get enough training to know how to deal with challenging behaviors in the classroom. I'm talking about kids with ADHD, autism, anxiety, learning differences. Some behaviors they might be seeing are meltdowns, an inability to sit still for long periods of time, and a refusal to do things, to do work, or even to go to school. So I wanted to create this video to help teachers know not only what to do, but how to make sense of what's going on. So Mona, can you help us understand what's going on when teachers see these behaviors in the classroom?
Thanks, Debbie. And I echo the appreciation that I have for teachers as well, and the deep respect and compassion that I have for teachers. It's a difficult job. So this is the lens shift for understanding behaviors. And that is that we can re-understand that a child who seems to be misbehaving is in the process adapting and surviving to these instincts. So there's a difference between behaviors that are willful and testing limits, getting negative attention, getting out of something, getting your own way. The problem we have is that the way the education system in general views behaviors is through the lens of behavioral technology. And in behavioral technology, you are looking at really behaviors as what you want to shift. And you believe that behaviors are there for a reason, such as a negative reason, getting out of something, or getting your own way, whatever that is. But instead, we can view behaviors from a different lens. And that is, rather than looking at how to get rid of behaviors, we can look at them and value them as a roadmap to what the child's nervous system needs. And it's like a kind of an instructional manual for each child. Their behaviors reveal their internal state. And that is the magic of understanding behaviors. And I'm hoping Dr. Porges will talk about a concept that he developed, because this concept was central in my shift in how I viewed behaviors. And it is the subconscious detection of threat and safety, called neuroception. Behaviors are challenging behaviors, and especially very challenging behaviors, are reflexive adaptations to a survival instinct. And I'm wondering if Dr. Porges might elaborate on that, because I really want teachers to understand this concept. It's essential.
Yeah. So, I mean, you summarized it very nicely, and you're actually the master of the application of the concept of neuroception within the educational model. So I'll tread carefully. But neuroception is our nervous system's capacity to detect and evaluate risk without awareness. Now, this makes it very interesting. When I started to come up with the concept, I wanted to use the term perception. I wanted to say that we were detecting or perceiving threat. But if I did that, I'd fall into the behavioral world of intentionality, because perception, if you don't perceive something, is it your fault? it meant that you didn't focus on that. That's how we would interpret it. So I needed to coin a new word, which was, in a sense, this automatic reaction to cues. And we'll give us some examples. You hear a loud noise, your body reacts, you orient towards it. You call it startle, but it's neuroception. And if the noise has certain characteristics, your body will tense up, you move into a physiological state of threat. If you're in a classroom where the mechanicals are noisy, like the air conditioning system, the ventilation system, those overlap acoustically and with features of predators. And you wonder why some children, like children who are on spectrum, don't want to go into the classroom, because the classroom is being bombarded with cues that their nervous system is interpreting through neuroception as threat. Now, we can say, oh, it doesn't bother me, it shouldn't bother you. But when we start dealing with special populations, like those on spectrum, they will have auditory sensitivities. Their auditory system is already retuned to detect those lower frequency background sounds, because that's the natural adaptive way that our body does things when it's in a state of threat. So for those autistic individuals, and often hyperactive kids as well, they'll have a low threshold to react to stimuli around them. But if you look at it from, I use this polyvagal lens, their physiology is really tuned to react to threat. Their bodies are under a state of threat. And when they're under that state of threat, their neuroception biases everything to be a threatening stimulus. When their nervous system is in a calmer state, their neuroception is biased now to be more resilient, to say, oh, that's just something occurring in background. They won't react to it.
Well, how would we interpret this with kids with ADHD and a lot of movement in the body? Is that also neuroception?
Well, first of all, you're giving a lot of information. If a child is mobilized, it means that physiologically they're not in a state of calmness. When they're not in a state of calmness, their body is, in a sense, tuned to be reactive in defense. So you're giving a lot. They're already in this state. Their body isn't calm enough. It's like when you have friends and they're like this when you talk to them. And do you think they're understanding you when they're like this? No, their body is in a state of threat reaction. So if you ever get into, let's say, an argument with significant others in your life and they get like this, there is no argument. There is no discussion, because there is no co-regulation. There's no bidirectional communication. The body is already self-protecting. And that self-protection is being seen in the child who's mobilized in the classroom. Their body is in a state of protection, not in a state of accessibility. And I want to give the teachers this continuum to think on one side, vulnerability, which means sensitivity to threat. And then you move it all around to the other side, and you have accessibility. And as a teacher, you want the students to be accessible. But accessibility requires the body to be vulnerable to another without going into defense.
So I'm just going to throw a myth out here, because I've heard it more than once, which is, oh, meltdowns, that's just what autistic kids do. Mona, do you want to elaborate on that?
I just have a visceral sympathetic surge on the question, because it is a myth, but I also don't believe that it's ever correct to attribute a behavior to a label or diagnostic label. I'm not a huge fan of the DSM anyway. I'm much more interested in the underlying processes across diagnostic labels. So what matters isn't what label a child is given. What matters is the reason that's underlying a behavior. So I would encourage parents and teachers, please don't ever attribute a behavior to a label. There is no such a thing as this is an autistic behavior. Every child will have their own behaviors based on their body's interpretation through their sensory systems of their world. and they're coding it in real time if something is safe or not unsafe. It's subconscious. So when a child is in a meltdown, we might think of it a tantrum. When a child is in a behavior that I describe as the red pathway, which is the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight response, that is a signal, as Dr. Porges just said, of nervous system vulnerability and non-accessibility. The child is in a state of defense. They're poised to move. So an example, I had a child who has this notebook that goes from school to home, right? And he had difficulty keeping his body still because the cues of threat, the ambient cues of threat in the classroom sent his nervous system into distress on a constant basis. The behavior book came home and it said things like the child is off focus, he's off task, he's disruptive. And then this sad face, like this sad face. So the child sees that. The child's body is adaptively responding to what the child needs to survive and to hang in there in the classroom. But this well-meaning teacher, and it's our educational system. This isn't one particular teacher. Our educational system, in my opinion, needs to stop negatively evaluating behaviors that are subconsciously driven in order to help a child reduce their own suffering. Subconscious and with a purpose. So subconscious means they're not willful. So please also don't say children use behaviors to communicate something. That's also inaccurate because it implies that the child is doing it on purpose. The body uses behaviors to reveal to the adults around the child the physiological state of that child. And this, again, is this idea of physiological state. I don't know, Steve, Dr. Porges, can you think of a simpler word for physiological state?
Well, you'll see it in the tension in the body. You'll see it in the intonation of the person's voice. You'll see it in the posture. You'll see it, so if the body's tense, that conveys. If the person's voice lacks intonation, that conveys. If the person's facial expression is flat, that conveys. People see that. I'd like to move right back to the initial part of that question and kind of treat it in a little bit different way. And that is, if a teacher or a parent doesn't pick up the cues that are antecedent to the meltdown, that is really, I would say, a little on the scary side, because it means that they're not being present with the child and aware of what's happening to that child's, again, physiological state, but in terms of the behaviors that are literally being manifested or on the platform of that physiological state. And that awareness of that tightening up of where the child is desperately trying to hold it together, but gets too overwhelming, and their body just reacts and says, enough of this stuff, I have to get out. There's one other aspect I'd wanted to bring up, and this is related within the polyvagal family, Mona. I started to create a group focusing on education, and you're one of the individuals. There's also a person in the UK by the name of Claire Wilson, who wrote a little book called Grounded, and she's an educator in the UK. And what she observed was that when teachers go into the classroom after having, let's say, an argument with their significant others, that's when they have the meltdowns and the tantrums in the classroom, because the teacher is no longer emotionally available to the student. And we forget that when we start blaming the child. We don't, in a sense, see the whole causal situation or system in which cues of safety are received, change physiological state, enable the classroom student to become accessible, and then create a co-regulatory relationship even with the teacher.
Oh, that is, I just want to just clap for that, and to just let teachers know you are so important to children. How you look at them, how you feel inside, first of all. Like if you've just had a really bad argument with your significant other, going into school, take care of yourself. Monitor your own calmness, because the way you look at a child, the way you talk to a child can make the difference between that child losing it and that child hanging in there with you, because human beings feel safe when they're with another person who is also feeling safe. And Claire is right. A regulated, calm teacher can regulate a whole classroom. Now that's asking for a lot, but I work with some schools that have volunteer grandparents sit in a corner, and if a child needs some help, if they look like they're starting to have big behaviors, they walk over and they have a warm, loving person read them a book. How awesome is that? How much better is that than sending them to a quiet room where they have to manage their distress by themselves? That's why I wrote Beyond Behaviors, because I was witnessing too many children being punished for having distress. And I say that with all due respect. Again, it's not the teacher's fault. It's the educational system's fault. And that is the power, I'm hoping, because Dr. Porges's work has taken over the trauma treatment paradigm. It's just really the cutting edge on trauma treatment. We need to move it into the educational system. And when we do, I believe we will make a dent in the school to prison pipeline, because this is the difference. This is so
important. This is so very important. And I think this video can be shared teacher to teacher, because this is such a paradigm shift, and it's probably not what teachers are hearing from their school system. So I just want to recap and get very brass tacks that when you have someone in the classroom who is showing a challenging behavior, whether it's being a wiggle worm in their seat, or they're getting very tense, maybe from the bright lights or sounds, maybe they can't pay attention that long, maybe there's someone near them doing something annoying, and maybe the teacher had something going on at home or with a colleague that put their state into a state of threat, that it's, Dr. Porges, you have said not only what you say, but how you say it, that this sort of energy that a teacher can bring to a classroom is so important. So maybe you can expand on that.
Well,
and
I'd like to build parallels between the educational system and the medical world. It's all about evaluation. And when you go to see a physician, it's all about getting tests and something wrong with you. It's not about a journey, a shared journey of health. Just like education is not a shared journey of health. It's bombarded with evaluation. And evaluation is triggers physiological states. So somehow the educational model has to transform itself to literally use evaluation almost in a stealth way that enables a shared sense of trust and success and feeling good about oneself. And that doesn't seem to be there. So I think you're getting the issues of this bidirectionality and this concept of teachers being super co-regulators with their students and not super inquisitioners, in a sense, so where they're in a sense saying, give me the answer, give me the answer. It's about, isn't this interesting? Let's discover. So it's become something more playful, and the word playful isn't necessarily meaning it's trivial. It means more interactive and more type of parody.
To bring joy.
Yeah.
So important, so important. So just, Mona, when we have 25 kids in a classroom and we have 1, 2, or 3 kids in that classroom who might, sort of show these behaviors on a regular basis, what can the teacher be thinking? You talked about bringing volunteer parents or grandparents in. What are some other strategies they can use in the moment?
Well, I think the most powerful shift can come from our mindset as teachers. So if the teacher's mindset moves from a sole focus on behavior management to a focus on emotional regulation and co-regulation, even that mind shift softens a teacher. So, I mean, I found it as a parent for myself, like when one of my children were acting up before I made the paradigm shift myself, I would be like, okay, what's my strategy here? I got to reduce this challenging behavior. It's rude. It's inappropriate. The other kids are all going to start to do it too. So I think when you shift your thought, when you look at that child in the moment, you see a child starting to squirrel around in their seat or, do something to their neighbor, try to identify those children that are the most vulnerable, and I'm sure teachers do at the beginning of the year, not the children who are the worst behavior problems because they get bad reputations, but the most vulnerable little nervous systems that need our tender, loving care. So if you see a child starting to wiggle around, you can look at the precursors, the lead up. So they may be in this calm, regulated green ventral vagal state, meaning that they're calm, but they're starting to head towards fight or flight. And then you look at the precursors and maybe you say, hey, Johnny, would you like to help me right now? There's some heavy books over there. Can you bring them to me? Those heavy books are calming his nervous system, but they're also saying, hey, I see you. You need a little help right now. Your body needs to move, and that's okay. Maybe if the child falls off their chair, the teacher can say to the rest of the class, Johnny's body really, really needed to move just then, so let's not laugh at him. Let's have an appreciation for what each of our bodies need to do right now. In fact, class, what does your body feel like doing right now? Let's model an acceptance of our bodies need to move. In human beings, movement helps us stay calm. Those are just a few little ideas.
Movement is so huge, so huge. So as we wrap it up here, any last thoughts for teachers who just have such an enormous job to do, so many kids under their care, their job is so important? Any last thoughts?
I'd like to bring up two different points. One is that not all children come from safe homes. And there's a lot of vulnerability due to the threat that is in their own home. And I think teachers need to be, in a sense, aware that the child who may be dressed very nicely, whose parents may be professionals and all have other resources, may also be coming from a family that's abusive. And not really saying that their job is to dig deeply and report it, but their job is to be supportive of the child and not to assume that the child is being well taken care of on that emotional level. The second point I wanted to bring up is teachers can explore with different arrangements of the classroom, especially when you start talking about ADD kids. Where are they placed in the classroom? Are they placed in the front row or back against the wall? Their nervous systems would rather be back against the wall. And what is the tendency? The tendency is to put them up in the front of the class. And now that child's nervous system is hypervigilant about things occurring behind him or her. But if they had let's say, a semicircular classroom or a curved wall that they could sit against, you would see that many of their bodies would calm down almost immediately. And that's where this says neuroception or the detection of risk. So I just wanted to put those 2 points on the table. You can be creative, change the context of what a classroom is. Mona gave good examples about learning a little bit of body awareness. You can deal with movement with facial interaction, with smiling at a person or talking is different than just movement. Because what we want is movement with that social engagement system, the face working. So that's why drama or plays are good. That's why different levels of team sports and interaction are good. Movement's great, but movement with facial interaction is even better.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Porges. It just reminded me of an example. This is a very, very salient and important point. it's not the movement, it's the interaction. So many kids have IEPs that have a OT sensory piece that says, give a child a movement break every so often, right? And so here are two different ways of saying that. So the teacher might say, okay, I see you're getting squirrely. It's time for your movement break. Go around the class. Okay, that's one way of saying it. That is giving a child movement. But guess what's happening inside that child's nervous system? Shame, right? Here's the other way to do it. And I don't use sensory diets because those are prescriptive. You have to do it in real time when the child needs it. The child starts to move. Hey, sweetie, it looks like your body needs to move right now. Would you like to take a moment and walk around? It's okay with me. One is done with love and with this non-shaming tone, and the other is acting as if a movement break is the magic. The relationship is what helps our children. And I just would, in my experience, since I've been using this idea of emotional regulation rather than behaviors over the last 20 years, the challenging behaviors often, very often, disappear on their own when you're focusing on what we're talking about. And so it's when you're properly addressing the child's relational needs for safety and their physical needs inside their sensory systems, the behaviors go away on their own. So I would just want to encourage teachers to share the news that the focus on behavioral management is now, in lieu of what we know from scientists like Dr. Porges, is now becoming outdated, especially if children's behaviors, their emotional tone, and their hope decreases. Then we know that we need to not focus on the behaviors. We need to go beyond the behaviors to the relationship.
And that's the title of your book.
I have one elaboration. I'm wondering if teachers can have like a little set of little tasks on their desk. So rather than say, honey, you need to move, they say, Celia, could you take this book down to that classroom for me? So they actually have a different level of involvement and pride in what they're doing, but they're still moving. So they have the intentionality of it.
Yes, and they feel like they're helping you.
Yeah.
They're helping you. It's not like something's wrong with your body. Our evaluative medical and educational system makes children feel like something's wrong with them for being neurodivergent. There's nothing wrong with your neurodivergent child. They have brain wiring differences. They didn't ask for them. And this will go into another discussion on another day of celebrating neurodiversity rather than labeling it and punishing children for the natural behaviors that emerge out of our differences.
Such an important talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Mona Delahooke, Dr. Stephen Porges. We're so grateful. Teachers, you heard it here. Shift from behavioral management to emotional regulation and loving relationship. And that's a great place to start. Thanks so much.